Listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
Welcome back, Horror Hounds, to Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show podcast.
I'm Mike Ghostman Pickle.
And I'm James Rivera. Today we are going to be honoring the release of a lost George Romero film, The Amusement Park, finally being released for the first time. 53-minute PSA horror film about the trials and tribulations of getting old. And in honor of The Amusement Park, we're going to be dedicating our episode to amusement park horror.
Love amusement park horror, dude. As James said, we're going to start with Amusement Park. It's the date on it's 2019, but it was actually shot in 1973. It's directed by the great George Romero and written by Wally Cook. Shot in 1973 on 16 millimeter film. A print was tracked down by Daniel Krause in 2018. And apparently in 73, the Lutheran Society hired George Romero to make a film about elder abuse and showing respect to old people. And then they were so shocked by the outcome that they shelved it and never showed it to anyone for 45 some odd years. So it stars Lincoln Mazel. He's the man who went on to star in Martin. And he actually died in 2009 at the age of 106. So he must have taken some pointers from this PSA.
Oh, that's a long time.
He narrates it. It's very obviously a PSA from the beginning. He tells you what the PSA is all about, and it's surprisingly effective. It gets real ominous from the moment he narrates it, because he finishes narrating and he goes to go into the story, and he has this ominous message: one day you will be old. Like, because everybody gets old, so this is a horror that everybody can look forward to or dread.
What was interesting about this to be this is pretty early George Romero, and it's the first time we're getting a look at it. I find it very interesting he was hired to do a PSA about elder abuse and getting older, but it kind of makes sense if you think about a film like Night of the Living Dead, which is filled with a lot of commentary and socio-political subtext, so it seems kind of natural that you would get somebody who's a little bit more familiar with elements like that. Though I have to even say, even by the standards of Night of the Living Dead, this is a pretty weird fucking movie. And I'm honestly not at all surprised that this was rejected or turned down or they shelved it, because I imagine Lutheran Society wanting to put something together like this probably wanted just a straightforward PSA about elder abuse. This is not a straightforward film. I think it's extremely surreal. It's frightening. It is filmed like a very ominous horror movie. There's a certain, for a while you're wondering if this movie even qualifies as horror, if you could even qualify it as amongst of George Romero's horror films. But after a certain point, it's very clear that you could. But I can't imagine that the Lutheran Society would not have been shocked by this film. It must have came across dark, bizarre, and probably much more out there than they could have ever anticipated it to be.
Well, honestly, what did they expect, though? I mean, I see why they were shocked by it and why it was a little harsher than they had imagined. But come on, it's George Romero. He was already popular for Night of the Living Dead at the time.
I think part of it is, I think the style that this movie was shot in, it's pretty I wouldn't say avant-garde, but it's pretty experimental, and it doesn't have very much straightforward narrative. And it's situations that in another director's hands might seem mundane, might seem kind of normal, but in George Romero's hand, he turns everyday occurrences into a nightmare. One of my favorite ones is the bumper cars, when it's old people riding around in bumper cars.
Yes.
I love bumper cars. I think those are pretty fun, but like this, I was almost called it a documentary. This film kind of reminds you that a lot of things in our society, whether it's amusement parks, cars, bumper cars, are not catered towards the elderly. They are catered towards the young. We don't take into account people who get older. It's almost as if society has decided to toss certain people out. and you really get that feeling with this film. And it's pretty sad at times too, because as the movie starts, like I said, the actor narrates gives a little bit of narration that already makes it ominous, and the things that he says about getting older at the end as a kind of a warning are pretty sad, and it makes you want to kind of prepare ahead of time for what may lie ahead for all of us at the end of the tunnel.
They go to the staples of an amusement park, the roller coaster, the little mini train, but everything is an increasing disaster.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everything gets a little more dire, a little more confusing, a little more frustrating. It reminded me of Mother, where everyone around the main character isn't acting like a normal person. They're kind of acting towards the metaphor. So no one's acting like a real person. Everybody's very frustrating. Everybody's kind of mulling about and adding to the horror and adding to the disorientation. And the score too. The score was very interesting, and it was sometimes disorienting too, especially for PSA. And then you see him go through the mundane things like an eye test, like the whole fear of, because as we get old, our body starts shutting down.
Mm-hmm.
You know, our eyes get worse and worse, our hearing gets worse and worse. So it illustrates that. And then, and as you said, the bumper car altercation, where, let's face it, we all get a little frustrated sometimes at old people on the road.
Mm-hmm.
They go super slow, they don't have the reflexes, and it's kind of dangerous. And you kind of wish old people could get off the road sometimes, because it makes it very dangerous to be out on the road. But what are you going to do? You're going to get to a certain age and not drive anymore?
Yeah, I think that's what makes this movie uncomfortable, because it confronts the audience with your own, I would say, prejudices towards the elderly community, the ageist qualities that everybody has, but they don't recognize in all of us. Because like you said, we've all been frustrated by old people on the road before. And this illustrates why you should not get so frustrated with it, because for the first time it clicked with me. I was like, that's actually really, really sad to have to be in that position in life where you can no longer function normally. People don't feel that you are able to handle, not only are you not able to handle driving, you get in the way of other people too, and you become a massive inconvenience to other people.
So this is why when I get frustrated on the road with somebody driving, erratically or way too slow, once I notice that it's an old person, I back off with the road rage or riding on their ass or anything like that. So I try to be accommodating to the old people that way. But damn, it's frustrating sometimes.
Yeah, but this
but
film is
it's
a reminder why you should not get a little too frustrated with it.
Yeah, exactly. But I like how it illustrates how old people are treated, but it also illustrates how old people treat others.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the way society treats them, because of the frustration of getting old, it causes them to act in a certain way that makes people more frustrated with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like the old people hitting a young man. So it's like the angry behavior. I think that was illustrating the angry behavior that makes people resent old people.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to the rich old man. Because he's rich, he gets special services at the concession stand. I thought that was a pretty funny and surreal part, where he's just in a normal amusement park, goes to the concession stand, and they're just rich men there, and they're giving him champagne and candles and the whole 5-star restaurant treatment. So I thought that was pretty funny. So it shows that when you're old, you can still take advantage of the class differences and the differences between the rich and the poor.
The movie kind of sets up a lot of what it's going to be about by having kind of that opening narration at the beginning. And I noticed that they were mentioning how society disadvantages people, not just for being old, but depending on how much money you had, how much wealth you've had. And it was pretty surreal, but it was actually really frustrating to see the other old man being catered to, waited on hand and foot, while every other old person couldn't get anybody to look at them. They could barely get any service. But I think the two most disturbing parts for me, one is a sequence that involves a fortune teller, young couple coming to a fortune teller who are very in love. It's very obvious, and they want to know what the future holds for them. And the fortune teller tells them, well, if you're going to be here, you have to see it all the way through to the end. So of course they're in love. They only see the happy side and the upside of what they're going through. And when they look into the fortune teller's crystal ball, whatever you want to call it, they see their future. They see themselves getting old, They see themselves unable to get a hold of their doctors when they're in frustrating situations. They are in housing that disadvantages them. They have no access to any kind of health care. Everybody treats them like shit, and when they're suffering, they have nobody to turn to. And this entire sequence is filmed extremely nightmarishly. And like I said earlier, in another director's hands, something like this could be sad, yes, but it would come across mundane. Here it comes across as the most agonizing, piercing experience that you could ever imagine going through. Really heartrending sequence for me.
And you have those spacey, disorienting sounds that keep coming in the score.
Yeah.
And that part, and you see that that retirement home nightmare, dude.
That was actually the other part that I found really disturbing about this, the retirement home nightmare. Uh, After the old man is being whisked away, he is tricked into going into kind of a retirement home. And I think that's what happens with a lot of elderly people. And I think that's a major fear amongst the elderly, having your loved ones grow tired of you. And I'm sure this happens, and I know this for a fact, this happens quite often. A lot of times when we put older people into a retirement home or a nursing home, anything like that, we try to lie to them and pretend it's something else or something that it isn't. And I think that's exactly what's happening with that guy. He's being whisked away to what he believes is an adventure, something that he can look forward to, and it just becomes nothing but, it's almost like the nightmare of a monotonous and mundane existence of getting old, not having anybody around you, and just going into an extremely repetitive routine.
I like that part where this was kind of cool too, where they give him a bunch of groceries, and they pile it on him and pile it on him. And at first I thought, why are they giving him food? What's going on here? And it's so many groceries that it's fallen out of his hands, and no one will help him carry him. I think that's illustrating like the charity that we give to old people that can sometimes be misguided. Like for instance, we have some elderly neighbors, and they're bringing us boxes of welfare food all the time because people come to their house, charities come to their house and just dump all this processed food on them. So then they have to try to give it to their neighbors or throw it out. So they're kind of burdened with our charity sometimes.
Sometimes when it's unnecessary charity.
Yeah, and then after this, he finally has a positive experience with the kid, because I think this shows that we kind of revert back to the way we were when we were a kid when we get older, because everything comes full circle. We have to take care of the kids when we're older, and then when we're younger, and then when we get older, the kids have to take care of us. So then he finally has a positive experience with this kid, and the parents get pissed and take him away because they don't want this creepy old man talking to their kids. So that's a really disheartening part. But off and on through the whole film, it's not like just like an unrelenting nightmare. It seems like a weird fever dream at times, where it's very dreamlike sequences where it's not necessarily nightmares. It's just surreal and dreamlike, and then it kind of flips and keeps turning into a nightmare, and then it kind of lulls you into the dream state again, and then throws another nightmare at you. I like how it done that. It also brings in several elements throughout, then starts piling those elements on top of each other, so to where even the good stuff is disorienting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because so much symbolism is piled in there, so much of the nightmarish kind of surrealism, it kind of piles on so much where even if something good is happening, you're expecting something horrible to happen at any time. So it's all disorienting from beginning to end.
Do you think that the movie would be better served with or without the narration at the beginning and the end? Because I've seen some people complaining about having the opening and the closing by having the lead actor appear in the opening and closing and kind of spell out what the movie's about. I personally don't think it's a problem given the nature of what the film is, but I've read quite a few complaints about that.
It added to the whole disorienting nature of it to me, that it had like this kind of normal narration that also has an air of ominous. It's very normal PSA type of narration, but it's also ominous and kind of creepy. A lot of the stuff he says, we already get in the film. You know what I mean? So he's repeating what we already know, but I kind of like it because he's kind of driving the message home, and he's kind of reiterating that this was what you were feeling in your head. This is what we meant you to feel, basically. Yeah. So I thought it was effective in that way. Plus, It was a really cool actor. I like that guy's presence. I like the way he talks.
One of the other things that I found really interesting about the film, and I actually think this is why the narration adds to it, especially the PSA nature of the film, is at the end, he's talking about how a lot of, they employed a lot of elderly people from this film, people who don't normally get out, people who are like the main character in this film, people who feel like they've been tossed out of society. And one of the things that he said, for some of these actors who are not actually actors, this was the most fun that they had had in years, was making this film. A lot of them never, for the first time in years, felt that they mattered or they were part of something special. They were part of something. That alone made me kind of sad. And most of the people who appear in this movie are not actually actors, which I think is pretty impressive. But it also, I think that also goes towards the effect that George A. Romero was going for. Nobody's acting like the situation is actually playing out. And I think by having people who are not experienced actors who are going to react in a more distance kind of way only helps to heighten the surrealism of this all. So I think it kind of serves a double purpose. It kind of puts you into more of a dreamlike state of mind by having such off-kilter acting to the situations that are occurring. And it also serves the function of, I don't know, contributing to helping what this movie is trying to warn against by trying to employ the elderly and trying to bring them in and try to make them feel a part of society. I thought that was very heartbreaking to learn all of that. Also, were you about to say something?
Oh, I was going to say, it seems like none of the other characters are part of his story.
Yeah.
They're doing their own thing, and he's kind of a nuisance to them. That's what I like about it too.
I think that's important to the themes of the film, that nobody acts like he's part of their story. It seems every time he comes in, he's an intrusion, where older people don't feel as important, that we don't even feel that they're worthy enough to be in our lives at the moment. We see their presence sometimes as an inconvenience, and that kind of was also very sad.
The saddest part for me came right after he tried to get help from the church, and he's saying that he couldn't even get help from the church. So he was feeling very despondent, very depressed. And then this sweet little girl calls to him, and he's so pleasantly surprised and so elated that this cute little girl called to him. So he goes over to her, interacts with her, and he starts reading her the Three Little Pigs. And then the parents come up and very obliviously kind of take her away because it's time to go, not because they want her to stay away from the old man, just that they have to go. Mm-hmm. And he starts crying so pitifully. I wanted to cry too. Through everything we've seen this man go through, this is finally what breaks him. Mm-hmm. Where and I think it illustrates, like, when people start getting older, it becomes very important to them to have the youth in their lives of their grandkids. So I think this illustrates how parents sometimes don't realize how much it means for their parents to interact with their kids.
It also says a lot about our perception of people, because every time he interacts with kids in this movie, either the kids get whisked away, or if they don't get whisked away, kind of obliviously like you just described, the parents or adults look around and they see and they start freaking out and start treating him like trash because he's talking to young children. And it's really sad because you realize he actually didn't do anything wrong. It's just the perception is that he's an old man. Therefore, if he's talking to youth or young people at all, it must be for a perverted or a creepy reason. So can't even go out into society and just exist as a person. And I think that's a big part of what makes some of the sad. And they even mention towards I think at the beginning and the end, how the way that we look at old age is we always describe it as the people's golden years, the time where you get to relax and you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor. You get to take in and share all the wisdom that you've acquired throughout your life. And we kind of build it up as this time where you become a respected member of society. That's what we tell people about getting old, and that's the myths of old. That is kind of the myths of aging. The reality is that people don't treat you the same. People look at you, like I said earlier, as a nuisance. They have assumed that you must have bad intentions if you are talking to children. And any extra help that you might need as a result of becoming older and frail is an inconvenience to everybody around. People who just want to see you, just get out of the way. Yeah, just that's how you're gonna get treated. And it's a very sobering movie to watch for that reason alone, because it's something that we all are probably going to have to face at some point, but it's not something I think that people think about that deeply or take that much time to really take in what it actually means to become old or to age.
And I think this is why the narration is important. Not so much the introduction, but the epilogue at the end,
Mm-hmm.
where he wraps everything up. I think that's very important to drive the message home, because it ends on such a depressing note, because it has that really depressing part with the little kid and he cries so pitifully. And then it goes right into the end where it kind of ends the same way it begins. It kind of comes full circle.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that we are to take a lesson from this to try to avoid this, but this character didn't. He suffered this fate, so we have nothing to be happy about, or nothing to take away from it until we have that final narration. And then he says stuff like, what you do in the amusement park is up to you, and it need not end in this white room. So he's basically saying that this character suffered this fate, but you don't have to suffer the same fate as long as you're aware of what old people have to go through. So I believe it's saying basically prepare yourself when you're young, appreciate your youth, and then treat the elderly better, because one day you will be old. And it drives that message home in the beginning and the end. One day you will be old too. You will have to suffer through this nightmare. So know what you're going to go through going in, and maybe you'll handle it a little better. The amusement park of life.
Yeah. So, yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think it fits in right in with George Romero's filmography in terms of the types of horror films that he made, in terms of the types of social commentary that he always injected into his films. Fits in right there with any of his Dead films, whether it's Dawn of the Dead. I'm not saying it's as good as that, but I feel like it's of a piece of that era of George Romero, and I think it's awesome that all these years later we finally get to see it a little extra. Another side of George Romero, really, too, because this is probably the strangest, most surreal thing I've ever seen him do.
And it's more than watching an old movie that you haven't seen yet.
It's watching an old master.
Yeah, it's like a brand new movie that just came out, but you're like reaching into the past and getting a new release. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Some really cool. This is available to stream on Shudder right now. It is a Shudder exclusive. If you're a George A. Romero fan, check it out. If you're a fan of classic 70s horror, check it out. It's like discovering a lost gem. And if you're just a horror fan, period, just check it out. It's George Romero.
Yeah, just know that it's not a standard narrative. It's very surreal and disorienting. So know that going in, and I think you'll enjoy it.
I think so too.
So that brings us to ones that are
More modern.
We chose two more modern theme park horrors, and decidedly less clever, and much less cerebral than amusement park. So the first one is Bloodfest from 2018. It's written and directed by Owen Edgerton, who did Mercy Black. Now, this is a perfect example. You know, even in a campy, silly movie like this, I love when a director has a singular vision. And you can really tell in a movie like this could have very well been a complete cliche, a very throwaway movie like some of these movies are. But I think it wasn't, just because it had the singular vision of Owen Edgerton. Mm-hmm. I mean, he directed what he wrote, and you can tell in the final product. And it stars Robbie Kay as Dax. He's the main character. Jacob Batalon from Spider-Man, the Asian kid from Spider-Man, plays Krill.
Ned.
And yeah, Ned. And he was one of the best parts of this film. He was really funny.
By the way, he's going to be playing the Hobgoblin, for those who don't know out there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's actually lost. He actually looks completely different now than he did when he made this film. He's lost a lot of weight. He's pretty slim now. So I think he did that to prepare for the role.
That'll be interesting. And Seychelle Gabriel, the really cute brunette, plays Sam. And Tate Donovan is in this, just cheesing it up as Dr. Conway, the main character's dad. He's by far the campiest part of this. Every time Tate Donovan was on the screen, the campiness factor went way up. So it's basically a it's a meta teen scream about a group of friends who go to a huge horror festival and find out that the man running it plans to use trained psychos and supernatural monsters to kill everyone at the festival so he can make a real life horror film. And the guy who runs the whole thing, orchestrates the whole thing, just so happens to be writer director Owen Edgerton. So that's another part of it that was entertaining to me. Like he kind of took his own vision and he was the main orchestrator of it. And that's where the Cabin in the Woods type of thing came in, where there's people behind the scenes orchestrating this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the way it starts. It's cool little score quips, and then Halloween night comes up on the screen. That's always a great way to start a horror film. And then I like the whole opening scene where a woman's showing her son horror films. Mm-hmm. Like the kid seems too young to watch horror films, and you just don't see parents this gleeful about showing their kids horror films in a movie. So I appreciated that, because this is the way I am. It reminds me very much of me with my kids, being ecstatic to show them a movie where somebody's head's getting twisted all the way around like a corkscrew. It's kind of twisted.
It reminded me also of growing up. My dad would show me a lot of horror movies. I have to say that kid is a punk. He was getting scared of White Zombie, the old ass Bela Lugosi movie. I love that movie. Not gonna get me frightened of it. I was getting frightened of Hellraiser and the Evil Dead, not of White Zombie.
So it starts incorporating the how they're going to use horror movie tropes as a plot point for the movie. So that starts coming in early.
Yeah.
So it's basically a teen scream energy, but it's more clever and self-aware than a lot of teen screams are. But it's self-aware, but it's still hokey sometimes.
Yeah.
Like did you get the feeling like it knew exactly what it was for most of it, but sometimes I think some of the really cheesy stuff wasn't all that deliberate. You know what I mean?
I think so I mostly enjoyed this movie, but I think the second half is the part where I enjoy it the least, because you start to feel the movie go a little bit too off the rails. It has a playful spirit from the beginning, which I appreciate. I don't need all of my horror movies ultra dark and serious and grim, but I appreciate the tone after a while. But after a certain point, it seems like it's unsure of where to take, what direction to go in, and where to take it in. And I feel like the second half has a lot of the same elements as the first half does, but not as smooth and as effective. And I think this is for me where the movie starts losing a little steam, is the more it becomes clear that this is very much a riff on the Cabin in the Woods. I think it ends up laying that element on a little bit too thick for my taste, where I start thinking too much about the Cabin in the Woods, which is a superior film to this, which, not saying that it's exactly the same. Obviously, the theme park element makes this quite a bit different in a lot of ways, but so many of the tropes and what I expected reminded me a little too much of Cabin in the Woods towards the second half of the movie.
Yeah, where with Cabin in the Woods, I was watching it, and it kept delighting me, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, ooh, that's clever. Ooh,
Yeah.
that's clever too. That's clever and funny. And this one, I was like, ooh, that's clever. And then I go, ooh, that's cheesy. That's hokey. Oh, that's you know, so it ebb and flow for me.
Yeah.
But I like the little things like the Bloodfest ad coming up, like they're announcing a monster truck rally or something, the Bloodfest festival, and it's all glorifying all these things that the dad just said was horrible about the horror genre, and it's all glorifying like it's great. That was pretty funny.
That was cool too. I don't know. All right, so I'm not trying to reveal too much about the twist, but this has a lot to do with how other people perceive the horror genre as being dangerous to society, or as being something that could infect the minds of the youth, which I think is a real thing. Some people still think like that. By and large, I don't think most people actually think like that, by the way. I think it's only a very small handful of people.
Yeah.
But I don't know. The character, the twist that comes around, the behavior changes so drastically, and it lays it on so thick that I found the twist a little hard to buy after a while. At first, I actually went for the twist, but then the behavior of that character started to seem a little bit inconsistent. And not only that, I think what my problem with that character's behavior, who turns out to be the villain, he starts acting in a way that is too obviously villainy. I think it could have been a little bit better if he maintained a sense of anger or a sense of bitterness towards horror movies instead of launching into this whole kind of like villain who's gleeful to do it at the same time, which I get what they're trying to go for. It's like the hypocrisy of people who say they don't like this stuff, but then kind of delight in kind of a certain kind of sadism. But it made the villain almost seem too simplistic for me in the way that he just starts enjoying it too much. I feel like there could have been, and I know this is a silly movie, but they could have handled that with a little bit more dramatic weight towards the end.
And the same type of thing happens with the main character. Not as bad as with that character, the villain, but with the main character, like they set him up as he's kind of an awkward guy, but he's still very knowledgeable about horror films, and he's really sharp and smart. But then he still makes really dumb decisions in order to drive the plot forward.
Yeah.
I thought he was too smart for that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I don't think it's quite as bad as the villain. I'm talking about the way that the character. It's just his behavior became too goofy, and I felt he should have stayed more of a threat towards the end. It kind of took the steam a little bit out of it towards the end. Do you think that he was behaving badly though, the main character, out of a sense of trying to act on the horror movie tropes that the movie's playing with?
I think
or
so.
Am I reaching?
In that way, it kind of gets muddled. The message kind of gets muddled.
Yeah.
And there's too many parts where it gets a little too convenient
Mm-hmm.
to move from one space to another.
Yeah.
And then the Bloodfest itself, it's way too huge. There's no horror event that's like Bloodfest. And then you see the big aerial shot, and I think it's pretty obvious that they patterned it like Disneyland. Like this is
I was thinking.
Yeah, like this is a big horror Disneyland. So I wish they had something like that, but they don't. I liked all the horror film talk, even though it went a little too far, a little too hokey sometimes. I loved all the references to other horror films. And then the crowd starts gathering, and then it kind of, the momentum shifts, and it kind of gets a little crazier once the crowd starts coming in. And it has those moments that I always watch for this moment in theme park horror movies, the shock and delight moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when something real horrible happens in front of characters and they're shocked. Oh my God. And then they go, that shock and delight moment. So this one had a pretty decent one.
It does, but I think that the next movie that we're going to talk about does what you're talking about, specifically what you're talking about, a little bit better than this one does.
I was going to say the exact same thing on the next one, yeah. So we'll get to that.
Mm-hmm.
But it also has another moment that's just like the next one we're going to talk about, where it's that moment where the crowd gathers and this shit is real, and they just start attacking the whole crowd. So that was done pretty well here. You get to see people split down the middle with chainsaws.
Mm-hmm.
And like one character has a chain with a knife on the end of it, so they throw the knife.
Mm-hmm. It's for me, the movie has a lot of stuff that I liked about it, and it's like fun up to a point. But I think it doesn't quite make it over the finish line for my taste anyway, is when it starts to feel too derivative of other movies. And there's a certain point where it almost feels like we've been here before, you know, the self-aware meta horror film where all the characters here have already watched horror movies and they're really into it. And that's always good to have in a horror movie, but there's something here that it seemed like after a point, they were just relying on the meta self-aware gimmick that started with Scream, continues with movies like Cabin in the Woods. And I don't think it adds enough to that to justify using that so much as a crutch. The self-awareness and the awareness of the horror movie tropes, I don't think it's as substantial as a lot of other films that have done this in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun with it, but so much of it is a mixed bag.
Just like lightweight almost. Almost has a throwaway quality to it.
Yeah, like with Cabin in the Woods, they were able to explain a lot of what was going on without a bunch of big exposition dumps.
Mm-hmm.
Like the director, especially here, that plays the guy that orchestrates the whole thing, he has a bunch of exposition dumps, And it's a mixed bag in those two, because it'll be something cool and it'll be something hokey, and it'll be something cool and something hokey, like
and it's the director himself.
yeah.
Makes it even funnier. The director shows up to explain what's going on in the movie.
Yeah, and when it shows the people, he has people working controlling the computer, which orchestrates all the carnage.
Mm-hmm.
So as they're playing, they think they're playing a video game. I thought that was a pretty funny part of it.
Yeah.
Where they're kind of oblivious. They think they're playing a video game with really good graphics. Mm-hmm. So then when they're the genre matchup, when the zombies are fighting the clowns, then that comes into play, where like that funny little twist in there. I thought that was pretty cool. And then you have that exposition where he talks about how he made the killers, where they show each psycho a different movie, a different horror film, and they show it to him over and over again until they think that they're the killer. I thought that was kind of cool. And then you have I thought it was a cool Zachary Levi cameo, the guy that played Shazam.
I forgot about that until this moment, but yeah.
Yeah. He had a decent little cameo. And then the whole arborist killer.
Which is kind of like, I would say it reminds me a little bit of Friday the 13th, but I don't think it does. It actually reminds me a little bit more of The Burning or Madman.
Yeah.
Or Madman.
Because he comes out with a tree trimmer.
Legend. That's what it
Yeah,
reminds
the Cropsey Legend.
Yeah.
Because he comes out with a tree trimmer, but it's not the big shears. It's that one that trims branches. So he comes and just whacks somebody's windpipe, just slits it.
Yeah, they have a lot of fun with the gore in here.
And it was cheesy and hokey at the same time, but I loved it. The whole hall chase, when the arborist was chasing him down the hall, and then they open the door and one of the characters comes in with a burning stick and is running through the hall. I thought that whole thing was pretty cheesy, but really cool and entertaining.
Yeah,
especially with the way the character reacts to his triumph.
Yeah,
I thought that was really funny.
Are those winds in your background, Michael?
Yeah,
I like
I
it.
had to come outside today.
That's all right. We can't.
And then again, it had a lot of cool setups, a lot of cool design of the actual theme park. But again, the next one we're going to talk about, I thought it had better setups. Like this one had a theater of the dolls, which was pretty cool. The torture chamber that was like Saw with traps in it.
It's I would describe it as like being filled with a lot of stuff that's cool, that's enjoyable. But I think by the time the movie's over, you're like, that's it. I don't mean that in a negative. I just felt like I wish there could have been more to it, and I wish that the ending could have been a little bit more solid. But it leaves me with the film. I was like, so that was enjoyable. Like, there's a lot of things that I really liked about it, but ultimately, it doesn't stand out apart from what it is. I think there's a lot of movies like this, and I've found very recently most of these amusement park movies are actually remarkably similar in plot, and I think it needed to bring to stand out more. It needed to bring something a little bit fresher to the table, a new spin, a new take on the whole meta aspect, on the whole meta element. I think that's what this film is missing. Has a lot of the ingredients, that are there in place. It has a good sense of self-aware humor, really nice score, characters that are for the most part really likable and enjoyable, good setups, a good location to work with. It just felt like we could have tied this all together a little bit better, and we could have made the villain a little bit more menacing.
Yeah. And they even added the rage virus thing in there. They saved that one all the way up to the climax. Mm-hmm. They even added the rage virus element. And I think it's just throwing so many elements in there, and so concerned with throwing as many elements and as many homages to horror films in there, and forgot to be as clever on its own.
Yes. Instead of repeating classic horror scenes for us, give us new classic horror scenes.
Yeah. So with me, it played with my expectations. Like it sets up a teen scream, but then it's refreshingly more clever and funny. But then it goes over the top into hokey, and you're not sure if some of it's intentional or not. But I thought it was a lot of fun. It's obvious that it was made by a writer-director who loves horror films.
Yes.
But again, it was a mixed bag, but overall I thought it was fun. And I also it came out just a few months before Hellfest, which was a higher budget, much more of a polish, but much less entertaining. I don't know what happened. I don't know. This was done by Rooster Teeth Productions. I don't know if Rooster Teeth just didn't market it properly, but this came before Hellfest, and it was a lot better and more entertaining. But Hellfest got a lot more attention. It was a lot more successful at the box office. This one was a huge flop at the box office. So I don't get it. It's just marketing, I guess.
Yeah. Not enough awareness of it.
And if it was better, and if it didn't have so many hokey parts, maybe it would have
I was
outdone the other one.
about to say word of mouth is also something that affects, especially with the horror movie original films. You think about some of the biggest hits in horror are word of mouth hits, movies that didn't open necessarily with like the biggest blockbuster opening, but because of the positive word of mouth, movies like Get Out, which became a massive box office success because of the word of mouth, because it kind of had legs. Same thing with something like Scream. Did not open huge, but became a massive box office success because of word of mouth. The Blair Witch Project is another one. I feel like with a lot of times, if you need to have something in your movie that is going to get people talking. And I think in order for this movie to have done something like that, it would have had to have been a little bit less derivative and added something new to the conversation in terms of meta horror films and theme park horror movies, if it were to be the kind of sleeper hit that we would want out of a horror film.
Yeah, maybe then it would have risen above that, the bad marketing. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think so.
So the next one we're going to talk about, it's kind of funny. This one is the Funhouse Massacre from 2015. First of all, this one was 3 years before Bloodfest and also Hellfest, which came out in the same year, a few months apart. This one was a lot like those two, a lot of the same plot points, but it's a lot better and a lot more fun than either of those other two. And it's funny to say that because this one's a lot more hokey than the other two, but it embraces the hokiness, and it's hokey from the beginning, and it's a fun hokey.
I was about to say that. My weird complaint, and it's not a complaint, my weird thing with this movie is it is very similar to Bloodfest, the Funhouse Massacre, and I actually think it's even hokier, like you said, yet for some reason it comes across a little bit better in this movie. I think there's a stronger commitment to its cheesiness, and like you said, the way that it embraces it, whereas the other one seems to be swinging and forth between trying to do something original with the genre and then just caving into the classics. Also, here's another thing why I think the hokiness is easier to buy. The hokiness in this is a little bit more original and seems to come from the film's personality and the effect that the director is going for. It doesn't come about because you feel like it's being too derivative or it's copying other things. I think this still plays with what people expect out of the horror genre. It's still very much about that, but I don't think it doesn't feel like it's going out of its way to copy other horror films or to try to rip off other scenes to kind of elevate this one. It seems to do its own thing a little bit more. It takes the genre elements that we know and plays with it instead of just full out recreating it like a lot of what Bloodfest does.
Yeah, where Bloodfest, a lot of the campiness was deliberate, but like we said before, a lot of it you can't tell whether it's deliberate or not. The Funhouse Massacre, every single thing that happens, every hokey thing, every funny thing is deliberate. This one's directed by Andy Palmer, and I thought it was really cool that it was written by Ben Begley, who would also play Deputy Doyle, probably one of the funniest characters in it. And the story was done by Renee Dorian, who plays the Bumblebee girl, the Virgin girl. So, like I said, it's much like Bloodfest, but more fun. It's more self-aware without being meta.
Mm-hmm.
It's less budget and less of a polish and more hammy, but it's better. Everything is delivered, like I said, and it's got a schlocky energy to it, but it owns it from the very beginning. Again, just like Bloodfest, it opens on Halloween night. Robert Englund is in this, and boy, does he ham it up. From the moment he opens his mouth, you know that he's hamming it up as his horror character. So he hams it up as the warden of like a maximum security asylum, but it's not that secure when it comes right down to it. The maximum security asylum with like 2 security guards.
Because it's hidden. Here's my biggest complaint about the movie. It's not what the movie does wrong. It's what it doesn't do. I loved Robert Englund in this. From the moment he comes on, he seems to be relishing every line that he's delivering, playing the doctor to a bunch of sick people, psychos, and they kind of set him up like he's going to be one of the main characters in the movie. And he's not. He's only in this for 12 minutes. I checked. I counted. I checked to see when his character exits. It's only for 12 minutes. And I got to say, I was a little bit disappointed. I was enjoying him so much. I was like, God damn it. Why couldn't you just let him be in this whole film? So if there's one complaint, I think they could have found a way to let Robert Englund be in the entire film. And I think it would have been even better if he were part of a part of the entire story, the whole plot. But alas, that's not what happens. So
yeah,
what it is.
I also love when Robert Englund says, "We house the ones you whisper about around the campfire."
Yes, very. Yeah, you could tell he's really hamming it up and enjoying his horror. He's playing up his horror icon status, and it is kind of the self-awareness that he is Freddy Krueger coming onto this movie. And I think the movie, what makes this work a little bit better, even though it's still kind of like, I don't want to say a throwaway quality, but it has more of like a lighter feel. Like don't take this too seriously. It's genre enthusiasm. Seems like it comes out of excitement, and it doesn't seem like it's relying on copying the films that it's inspired by so much.
Yeah. Well, the thing also that made the film for me is, for a film like this, you have to have a great group of villains and a great group of victims as well. And I thought this one had both. I mean, cliched as hell, but
intentionally.
Intentionally cliche. Both the villains and especially the victims are very cliche, but it's the charisma of the character, the actors that they chose as the villains and the victims. Everyone has charisma. Everyone jumps off the screen. Every single character for me. Like when they start by introducing all the villains. Mm-hmm. It's like, on top of introducing the villains in a very hokey way, it's also little vignettes with fog in the background and spotlights and a grandiose score, like they're setting up a wrestling event. And they introduce the cannibal chef, played by E.E. Bell. All these are very accomplished character actors. The cannibal chef, played by E.E. Bell. Dr. Suave, the dentist, played by Sebastian Siegel. And then, of course, the great Clint Howard plays the taxidermist.
Taxidermist, yes.
And Rocco, the giant clown wrestler, played by Mars Crane. And probably my favorite character from the movie, Mental Manny, the cult leader, played by Jerry Burns. I love that guy. Awesome character actor. He's been in hundreds of things throughout his career, and he's always good. I love that look of his with his eyes are like turned up, looks mean or something. I really like his look, and I like his whole voice and his delivery and everything. And of course, the killer clown girl cheerleader, played by Candice DeVisser. She was awesome, beautiful, cool. Her sequences were really cool. And that brings me to the victims. I loved all the victims, especially the Doctor Who guy with the fedora. He was played by Matt Angel. And of course, he likes the mousy virgin, the girl in a butterfly costume, played by Renee Dorian, the co-writer. The hot, promiscuous Asian girl, played by Chastity Ballesteros. She was really cool. I loved her look. I like the way she acts. And of course, she bangs the jock, played by Sterling Sullivan. An interesting thing about Sterling Sullivan, he was in a really good It musical. We went to a cabaret-style musical set in a bar where they kind of used the whole bar as a stage, and they kind of went around and interacted with the audience. So that guy was in that, and that was really cool. And of course, the Latino guy, dressed like Machete, played by Eric Chavarria, he was hilarious. And then, of course, you have to have the stoners. The obligatory stoners was in it. One of the guys, I forgot his name, but the kid with the curly hair, he was in a Nickelodeon show. So my kids got a kick out of seeing kid from the Nickelodeon show getting his head bashed in. That's funny. Of course, Courtney Gaines from Children of the Corn, one that played Malachi. He plays the guy that runs the place. I thought it was cool to see him in it
That
too.
was Malachi?
Yeah.
Of course.
Outlander.
Of course it was. Although I have to admit that the cheesiness fits this movie better than Children of the Corn, which I am not a fan of. That is the most overrated classic horror movie. But proceed. I'm not going to start ranting about that right now.
Also, the attraction, the haunted attraction itself. It's a real haunted attraction called Land of Illusion Haunted Scream Park in Ohio. It's a real haunted attraction, and you can tell.
Yeah.
It has that authenticity to it, and I think that kind of grounds the movie and makes it more entertaining the whole time that they're in an actual haunted attraction. I love the scene where you see I love the female sheriff and the bumbling deputy played by the writer. And when the deputy contaminates the crime scene while he's explaining to the sheriff his theory of how he thought the murder went down, I thought that was hilarious.
He was actually my favorite character, and like I feel like his character is kind of a cliche too.
Yeah.
And this specific cliche is something that usually annoys me in horror movies, is the bumbling sheriff. I don't think it's been done well since Deputy Dewey in the Scream flicks. Here, I actually liked it. It was one of the only times where you took this kind of tired trope of this incompetent sheriff who kind of rises to the occasion at the end and kind of makes it worthwhile and likable. So he's probably my favorite. Like I say, what also makes this movie better is it has a similar lead character, I think, kind of to the last film that we have, Bloodfest. But I think this one is a lot easier to root for. The acting is a little bit better, and I think it's a little bit more. He's a little bit more relatable as an avatar for the audience. Where this movie definitely plays up how indebted it is to the horror genre and other horror films. I kind of feel like to relate to the other character, the main one of Bloodfest, you have to be really, really be a horror fan. I feel like this is an easier entry into the story for the average audience member. And I think he was also more likable as well of the character.
Yeah, definitely. And I love the whole sequence of the villains going into because there's already an existing haunted attraction here. And each of these killers has their own setup, their own room that kind of fits their real killer persona. Because it goes back to the clown girl kind of orchestrated this whole thing and kind of worked with the owner to set the whole thing up. So she has these rooms set up specifically for these killers. So then you see them come in to replace their counterparts, and everyone is funny.
Yeah.
Like Clint Howard comes in to replace the taxidermist, and then the clown guy comes in and rips the face off of that clown and puts it on his own. I thought that was really cool.
This one also has really good versions of the type of scenes that you were talking about in the previous movie. The moment where violence and carnage is happening in front of a lot of the characters, and they end up laughing at it or not taking it seriously because the context that they're in, they think that they're in a theme park and this is actually just a show being put on. But I think this works a little bit better in here because in Bloodfest, strangely enough, like we said, this is a more outright hokier film. It kind of felt goofy when the characters in Bloodfest, when you saw people get kind of massacred and then people kind of really start laughing at it. This one felt a little bit more disturbing to me, like especially when that one kid gets knocked out from the back and you see him very obviously bleeding and everybody wants to go and take a selfie with him. I think this works a little better because it's a little bit more uncomfortable. Yes, it plays up the comedy aspects of people not realizing that they're actually witnessing real killings and brutality, but I think it's a little bit more disturbing before the fact, and I think that it plays with the audience's knowledge that it's actually happening a little bit better than Bloodfest does.
Yeah, I think this one does it a lot better because when the killing first starts, the killers aren't they aren't hiding it really.
Mm-hmm.
They're just going about their business, but you can see it seems plausible that people would walk through and see them working on real people and just think it was fake. So it was a plausible deniability that these people were walking through while these killers were torturing real people.
Mhm.
So it had a long sequence where it went through where none of the spectators knew that these were real villains and that they were real killers. And then it gets to the crowd gathering and them saying this is real, and then everybody runs around in a panic.
Mhm.
And it really kicks everything into high gear. So this one had both elements of playing around with the real haunted attraction type of thing.
So did I agree with you on that. I liked all of the cosplays in this movie. I like the machete cosplay too. One, it's the machete cosplay is specifically something funny because it's actually not a very good machete cosplay to begin with.
Yeah.
To point that out, but the character ends up taking on the role of Machete in this movie, basically,
Yeah.
by the end of it, which I thought was a little clever, kind of funny.
It's the cult leader versus the DJs, where he comes in and rams the mic down one of their throats.
Really,
And that was really, yeah, and that was really cool. And then that happened, the whole sequence I like as well, where the crowd cheers, and then the cult leader is like, oh, you guys are twisted. So it's kind of a commentary on how twisted horror fans are, and how the more graphic and the more real it is, the more we cheer.
Bloodfest did a similar scene, but I don't think it was quite as effective. But then again, these amusement park movies are all remarkably similar, aren't they?
Yeah.
They all have to have that scene where there's carnage. People are aghast at first, and then they start cheering, not realizing it's real. Yeah, so remarkably similar.
Bloodfest had the writer-director kind of hamming it up as the guy who orchestrates everything. This one had a very accomplished character actor as the cult leader orchestrating everything, so that made it much more effective and kind of scary and entertaining, because that guy is really good at being a creep. I love the kill where the clown girl saws a cheerleader's head off and then dances around with the heads.
Yeah, that part was creepy too.
I love that part. And then it gets to the end, and it really doubles down on all the face-offs. You got the bumbling deputy versus the giant clown, and then the sheriff versus the cult leader, and then a machete guy versus the cannibal chef, and the sheriff versus the clown girl. So it was all these showdowns of characters as you get to the end. But I just didn't like how it went through all these cool face-offs and all this cool fun and all these great kills, and then the characters kind of walk out and they're done, and then one of the main characters gets a really cheap kill.
Yeah,
Didn't you think so?
I think so. I didn't like cheap kill, and to be honest, I think what my least favorite thing about this is the ending. I don't like how they did. Like, of course, you want to I don't know how to put it. You want to put some real tension in your movie, and you want the audience to feel like even some of the main, most beloved characters could get it, because that's the danger of being part of horror movies. But that kill happens. By the time that kill happens, I think the audience has already checked out of that aspect, and the story is over. And it kind of wrapped itself up in a way that's satisfying. To throw that in after seems like it's trying a little too hard. Like, oh no, we're gonna kill off, and it didn't feel earned. And it's not likable. I didn't like it. And then that the twist at the end does not work for me either. And the twist with one of the sheriffs, her connection to Mental Manny, does not work as well for me either, because it doesn't seem developed enough. And most of all, I don't really think the movie needed that twist. I understand that they were trying to give it a little bit more heft towards the end, but I think the movie works just fine as kind of a fun, hokey horror film. I don't really think it needed that twist right there with that character. I'm not sure what it adds to the story. And go on.
I mean, I kind of disagree with that, but you definitely have a point, because that really cheap kill at the end kind of just left a sour taste in my mouth, and then the epilogue was at least better than that, so it felt like it redeemed it.
A little bit, but even the epilogue was a little bit crazy. I just feel like the climax and the end of this movie could have been resolved in a different way. And I think a lot of horror filmmakers are afraid to like just end the movie with, some of the main characters walking away and, without some sort of danger or like, fuck, one of the main characters got killed. I kind of feel like that was put in there because it's a horror movie and they can't do that. But I think it's okay from time to time. If Get Out taught us anything, I think it's okay to let your main character survive and make it through the end. You don't always have to kill them off at the end just because this is a horror movie. And for the love of God, please don't do it after the audience has already checked out and the story feels wrapped up. That is the cheapest part of that character's death, is that the movie feels over and you just toss that in.
Yeah, and you're invested in all these characters, and then you see these two main characters kind of against all odds kind of survive to the end, and then they kind of just bleh.
And that's another thing. It almost feels like, what were we rooting for? Because those are the characters that we're rooting. Like, what are we rooting for if we can't even see that through the happy ending? And I don't demand happiness from horror movies. That's not what I'm saying. If anybody knows me, I prefer bleak, I prefer ambiguous, and I prefer haunting endings. But I think for the purposes of this particular film and the kind of spirit that it had and the way that it went, it would have been served better by a more positive ending.
I think I mostly like the epilogue just because I like the character that was involved in it so much.
I could see that.
And by the way, this also had the end credit scene just like Bloodfest, so there's another similarity to Bloodfest.
Yeah, similar. But they're both remarkably similar movies. I think that they both have their strengths and weaknesses. But ultimately, I'd have to say the Funhouse Massacre is more successful at being, well, fun. I think it's just a funner movie, and I think it realizes what it does. And I think despite it being a very familiar film, it's not as reliant on past horror films as Bloodfest is, which ultimately makes it, for me, the superior film. Although I gotta say, why couldn't you keep Robert Englund in there? He was so effing fucking awesome in the sequence that he's a part of, that you kind of just wish he were in it for the rest of the movie. I'm not gonna lie, that kind of upset me. I was like, what? And then to give him top billing, which I understand why you're doing that, because it's Robert Englund. It's going to be the biggest selling point of your movie, but it was a little bothered me just a little bit.
Well, and plus they probably, a lot of filmmakers do this, especially up and coming, where they get an icon involved and give them a very small part.
I mean,
like,
in all fairness, it could be because of like a budget, or that's the only one he's available, so you want to get where you can. But this could be just me, like I said, bitching and moaning that I didn't get enough Robert Englund. But I actually think his performance was the most memorable performance in this movie.
Yeah, and plus they had a Robert Englund in a small part, which is probably kind of expensive, and then Clint Howard in a bigger part, which was also probably kind of expensive. So they're like, we need to save the rest for the
budget. Yeah, which is understandable. Which is, like I said, it's kind of a useless gripe, because I think I understand the reason why. It's budgetary reasons. But alas, I'd rather have 12 minutes of Robert Englund in here than no Robert Englund at all.
But I would like to have seen more Robert Englund and more of Clint Howard.
So do I. This one is available on IMDb TV, which is a free movie app, which is available. If you have Amazon Prime, it's easy to check it out. The only thing is you're going to have to watch some commercials if you watch it, but they're pretty short commercials. I don't think they last very long, and it's not that frequent. So
isn't it on Tubi as well?
Yeah, it's on Tubi as well, but you're going to have the same situation. They're really short commercials, but I don't really think it's enough to do any damage to the film. Bloodfest is available to watch on Amazon Prime for free. And the Amusement Park is a Shudder exclusive. And it's weird. That was the best movie, I think, of the three, like the most accomplished film. But it's the one that I have the hardest time discussing or describing what makes it so good. Because it's one of those movies that a lot of what makes it good is not something that could be put into words. It's the effect it has while it's watching on you. It's the feeling. So I kind of felt myself getting lost for words when we were discussing it, that movie. And I felt like I had a lot more to say about these. even
Yeah.
if I don't like them as much. Maybe just because it has more traditional elements that are easier to break down in a normal way.
But it's funny that so many aspects of Bloodfest were better, but this was still more entertaining.
Mm-hmm. I think it's the spirit that goes into it as well.
And I love seeing a low budget and then a lot of creative things done within that budget.
Yeah.
So that's always fun.
So this was our theme park horror episode. We hope that you enjoyed that. We'll be back next week. Tune in. Follow us on facebook.com/Pickles Horror Show. That's for Facebook. If you want to join our Facebook group, it's Ghostman and Rivera's Horror Show Podcast. It's a group where we can discuss, obviously, our podcast. You can reach out to us, ask us questions, mention anything that you want us to cover or talk about on the podcast. But it's also for you as well. Share your upcoming projects if you're in the industry, whatever you're working on. Any horror discussion is welcome in there. Just join them. Either Mike or I will let you in. We also have Instagram at Pickles Horror Show. That's our Instagram, so check us out there. And check out our flow page, which is in all of our podcast descriptions. It gives you an access to our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts.
And you can also keep up on all the news on our feature films coming up. We got one that's coming up pretty soon, and we'll be able to announce it pretty soon, so stay tuned. Probably in the next few weeks, we'll be announcing our next project, which we already have the script written for, and we just finished the pitch deck for this week, and the investors are very excited about it.
Yes. Lots of good stuff on the horizon. Until next week, folks, happy horror.
Happy horror.